We are going to begin by reviewing some vocabulary that we learned the last couple weeks. These vocabulary words are weathering, erosion, and deposition. Weathering is the process that breaks down rock and other substances at the Earth's surface. Heat, cold, water, and ice all contribute to weathering. So do the oxygen and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Repeated freezing and thawing, for example, can crack rock apart into smaller pieces. Rainwater can dissolve minerals that bind rock together. You don't need to go to the mountains to see examples of weathering, though. The forces that wear down mountains also cause bicycles to rust, paint to peel, sidewalks to crack, and potholes to form. The forces of weathering break rocks into smaller and smaller pieces. Then the forces of erosion carry the pieces away. Erosion is the movement of rock particles by wind, water, ice, or gravity. Weathering and erosion work together continuously to wear down and carry away the rocks at the Earth's surface. Deposition occurs where the agents of erosion deposit or lay down sediment. Deposition changes the shape of the land. You may have watched a child who picked up several toys, carried them across the room, and then put them down. This child was acting something like an agent of erosion and deposition. Weathering, erosion, and deposition all act together in a cycle that wears down and builds up the Earth's surface. One thing we have to realize is that the Earth does not look like it does today as it did 1,000 years ago. The planet is constantly being shaped by forces like volcanoes, earthquakes, and erosion. Living things also have a role in the process. Through constructive and destructive forces, Earth's landscape is constantly built up and torn down. Violent events such as volcanoes and earthquakes can change the landscape suddenly, while more subtle processes like weathering will slowly change the Earth's surface. The first one we'll look at is constructive. It's important that you look in part of the word you see, construct. If you think about a construction worker, their job is to build things. Constructive forces are processes that help build up the earth, either by depositing soil or silt in a river, or by volcanoes and lava flows that generates new land. When you see the word destructive, you want to look and see that in part of the word it says destruct. If you were ever told that you were a destructive child, that meant that you often broke things, made a mess, or ruined things. It's the same idea when we talk about destructive forces. These forces destroy or break down the earth, either through the violent actions of volcanoes and earthquakes or by the steady flow of a river. A continental glacier is a glacier that covers much of a continent or a large island. They can spread out over millions of square kilometers. Today, continental glaciers cover about 10% of the Earth's land. They cover Antarctica and most of Greenland. In places, the glacier covering Antarctica is over 3 kilometers thick. Continental glaciers can flow in all directions as they move. Continental glaciers spread out much like pancake batter spreads out on a frying pan. Many times in the past, continental glaciers have covered larger parts of Earth's surface. These times are known as ice ages. For example, beginning about 2.5 million years ago, continental glaciers covered about 1/3 of the Earth's land. The glaciers advanced and retreated or melted back several times. They finally retreated about 10,000 years ago. A valley glacier is a long, narrow glacier that forms when snow and ice build up high in a mountain valley. The sides of mountains keep these glaciers from spreading out in all directions. Instead, they usually move down valleys that have already been cut by rivers. Valley glaciers are found on many high mountains. Although they are much smaller than continental glaciers, valley glaciers can be tens of kilometers long. As a glacier flows over land, it picks up rocks in a process called plucking. Beneath the glacier, the weight of the ice can break rocks apart. These rock fragments freeze to the bottom of the glacier. When the glacier moves, it carries the rocks with it. Many rocks remain on the bottom of the glacier, and the glacier drags them across the land. This process, called abrasion, gouges and scratches the bedrock. Both of these are examples of a destructive force because they are destroying the land. The mixture of sediments that a glacier deposits directly on the surface is called till. This here is a picture of till. It is made up of particles of many different sizes. Clay, silt, sand, gravel, and boulders can all be found in till. This is an example of a constructive force because it builds up the Earth's surface. The till deposited at the edges of a glacier forms a ridge or a hill called a moraine. A moraine almost looks as if a bulldozer pushed up a pile of rocks, boulders, and sediment into a pile. This is an example of a constructive force because we're building up the Earth's surface. ESKERS are produced as a result of running water in, on, or under the glacier. They are mounds of sand, gravel, and sediment that form a long ridge or hill that form a long, winding snake pattern. These are examples of constructive forces because they build up the Earth's surface. Erratics are large boulders or pieces of rock that have been picked up by glaciers, and as the glaciers have melted, they have left the boulders in random places. These are examples of constructive forces because they are building up or adding to the Earth's surface. Outwash is large deposits of clay, sand, gravel, and sediment that have been deposited after a glacier has been changed into a running body of water. In the circle, you can see that all of that sediment has piled up and deposited on the Earth's surface. This is an example of a constructive force because we are adding to the Earth's surface. Retreating glaciers also create features called kettles. A kettle is a small hole that forms when a chunk of ice is left in a glacial till. When the ice melts, the kettle remains. Often, these fill up with water, forming small lakes or ponds called kettle lakes. This is an example of both constructive and destructive forces. The actual process of making the hole is destructive because it's formed through erosion. However, when we add into the water and we form a lake, this is a constructive force because we're adding to the Earth's surface.